All right, y'all. We back in here. Brentford 2, Chelsea 2, and honestly, a result befitting of the performance on both sides. Admittedly, from both Chelsea and Brentford, it was always going to be a bit of a trap game coming in, and unfortunately, that bore out. Being that Brentford are a tough team to play away from home. In all honesty, the game should have been secured. We had a couple Cole Palmer chances, and that should have been put away. And first game back off the bench, off an injury, you would hope that he would do a little bit better with those chances. And the team overall, the performance wasn't very good, especially in the first half. I'll get onto that in a little bit, but yeah, just overall frustrating performance, and against a side that admittedly should have been comfortable enough for Chelsea to handle, even with the amount of rotation that was done by Enzo Maresca in this match. This makes, I think, one win, in the last four away to Brentford in the past 4 seasons, obviously. Let me just make sure I have that correct. It's actually the fourth draw in a row. My apologies. Away in the league to this team, and this team always proves to be tricky for Chelsea. The one thing going into the game that I mentioned in the match preview, or two things I should say, was it'll be a test of the set pieces and the margins that Chelsea had shown improvement on to start the season. And then the other thing was that a lot of players were going to get a chance to come into the side and impress. And unfortunately, neither of those things happened. So getting on to the match, we had a couple of team news from both Brentford and Chelsea. Damsgaard for Brentford, their main creative outlet, was ill. And then Stevao, who was already coming back late from international duty, having played in for his country, he also was ill and did not make the squad, unfortunately, for this match. Getting on to the starting lineup, I mentioned that there would probably be some rotation, and I gave the lineup that I would hope to see, and that largely was borne out. The one disagreement that I did have was Fofana at right back. I thought it would be Gusto if Reece James wasn't fully fit to play 90 minutes. And unfortunately, for me, I guess it was Fofana. And, other than that, I didn't really have any complaints. I thought Cucurella could have started for Hato, but I don't blame the manager for starting Hato at left back. Considering the talent that he has, this should have been a side that he played very well in. But, those two key points, those players were both swept off at halftime. Along with Buonanotte. So we'll get. Otherwise, the lineup I thought was pretty much as expected. Getting on to the first half, it was always going to be a match where Chelsea dominated possession, and where Brentford were going to gain their advantage was in transition and in the margins, and those margins being set pieces, long throws, things of that nature, as I mentioned in the match preview. And that first shot a goal where warning signs were there earlier in the match in terms of those clip balls over the top where Shada peels off the shoulder of the center back, and those passes clipped over where he can run onto it and then be isolated one-on-one against Tosin the first time and the second time. The first time being that Tosin got the block in, but the second time Shada was able to shoot between his legs, and it was a little bit of a deflection, but it was on target, and it ultimately gave Brentford the lead. And that was the strategy from Brentford, those set pieces, and then in transition, a striker peeling off the shoulder and passes being played over Tosin's head for him to have to chase and try to beat his opposition for pace, which is not his strength, obviously. And it was a good pass by Jordan Henderson, I have to say. But in any case, that was kind of the theme of the game. Chelsea dominating possession, or the first half, Chelsea dominating possession, a little bit of spark here and there, but ultimately leading to no real chances, and Brentford looking dangerous in transition. And then also, moving on to the rest of that first half, I thought Enzo looked better than he had been before the international break. But I thought Caicedo looked a little bit tired and a little bit leggy. Same thing with João Pedro, although that changed when his role changed in the second half. I'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, that midfield with the injury to Dario Sugo, Lavia still not being fit, and Andre Santos returning late from international duty meant that it was going to be Moises Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez. Although I thought there was a shout for Reece James to play in midfield in this game. But again, he played both matches for England on international duty, so it probably wasn't smart to start him in any case. And in that first half, part of the struggles from creating chances came from the fact that although Pedro Neto, there were a couple of clip balls over the top for him to run onto, same thing with Gittins. There weren't any runners in the middle. Buonanotte while he looked actually pretty decent, I thought, just wasn't a fit for this match. He wasn't going to be the one to make runs beyond the back line. He wanted the ball played into feet. And João Pedro, who can deputize as a center forward and is a really good center forward, as the first half went on, he got a little frustrated and was dropping off a little bit as well, and it left nobody to run in behind. And usually when that happens, somebody like João Pedro dropping off, you would see in the cases that Cucurella would be in midfield, he would be the one making those runs from midfield through the center. And Hato, well, I think was comfortable, inverting and being, and sitting next to Caicedo, he wasn't very comfortable moving into midfield beyond that. And there was no room for adjustment with the way the lineup was, with Fofana tucking in to be the right center back and Chalobah being the left and Tosin in the middle. So it kept the structure there, but there wasn't much invention in the first half. And as a result, going into the first half, it was 1-0. And Brentford were doing a really good job of frustrating Chelsea, triggering their press the same way Crystal Palace did, except I think Brentford weren't afraid to go man-to-man when they started pressing and forcing Chelsea back. Van den Berg and Ethan Pinnock weren't afraid to chase their markers into midfield and harry them. And it frustrated Chelsea. And because there were very rarely any runs in beyond Brentford, it just left Chelsea stuck in that first half. And then a note on Gittins, who I think lasted about 55 minutes in this match. He looked not very good, if I'm being honest. Joining a new team, it's early still, but unfortunately for him, the competition is there for his place. Garnacho came in and made his debut as a sub in this match. Tyreek George can obviously play there. We saw Pedro Neto start. I think it was the first 2 matches on the left as well. So it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to make his mark in this match, and hopefully we see better of him in the future. Moving on into the second half, we saw 3 halftime substitutions, both fullbacks, Hato and Fofana, off for Reece James and Cucurella. And then we saw Tyreek George in for Buonanotte, and he moved into the 9, which allowed João Pedro to play as the 10. And immediately we looked more positive and more confident in possession and a lot more inventive as well. There was also a change in tactic. Chalobah and Adebayo Tosin still being the center backs, but Reece James tucking into midfield, and Cucurella, who, like, when the team had possession deep, was that third center back. But once that dominance was established and the team pushed up the field, he had no trouble pushing into midfield, inverting, making runs and underlaps and that sort of thing, which left 2 in the back. And then it was almost Reece James and Caicedo being the double pivot to help recycle possession. And it was much more aggressive, and it allowed the team to play passes a lot easier And I'm glad we saw that tactic change. You know, one of my criticisms of Enzo Maresca last season, especially in that lull period, was the fact that he struggled with in-game adjustments. I would say it was more like for like substitutions. And then once we saw Cole Palmer in the match, as I said previously, for Gittins, immediately, like, the team looked so much better. And, you know, I think it shows that not everybody, I think, is fully bedded into the system, I would say. And so as a result, I think mass rotation in this match proved that it's not possible yet for this team, where you can bring in, you know, I think Buonanotte, Gittins, Hato, and Fofana are the ones who didn't start the match before the break. And 4 changes like that, I just think is unfortunately too much, which is sad to say. Who knows? You know, we had a few injuries, players coming back late, as I said, so maybe that's not always going to be the case, but for now, I think it proved that it's just not a good idea. For now, until players get more comfortable with each other and there's a better gel with the players coming into the side. Going on to the equalizer for Cole Palmer, you know, as I said, the team looked so much better with those substitutions, those 3 specifically. And, you know, it was a good cross from Enzo. João Pedro did a really good job of heading and nodding the ball down, and Cole Palmer immediately equalizes. And, you know, with João Pedro, him playing as the 10, that's probably his best position and where he's most comfortable. He can show for the ball freely, roam if he needs to. And so it was really, although he was back at striker when this goal was scored, I think it's clear that his best position is as a 10 for this side moving forward. Obviously, it's not going to be the case because Liam Delap is injured long term, and Mark Gue, who was recalled on loan, wasn't even in the squad for this match, who's the other striker, and as a result, Tyreek George had to be the nominal number 9, making runs in behind and keeping defenses honest, knowing that he wasn't going to be involved in the play too much, but it allowed João Pedro to be where he's best utilized. And then immediately after, I think, the goal on the restart, Kevin Shada again, it was a cross from the left-hand side, I believe. He did well to fight and bring the ball down and got the shot off. I thought he was their man of the match, honestly, their best player on the day. And he looks to be a really good player, honestly. There was this one moment that I wanted to bring up where Cole Palmer, I think, made a run through the center onto the right channel, and Enzo just didn't play the ball in behind. I wish I had written down the minute for it, but those were the type of runs that I was talking about. It was after the first goal and before the second Chelsea goal, obviously. It was in the second half. And those are the types of things that Buonanotte just isn't able to do. And João Pedro could do them if he was the 10, but as a striker, you know, his job is leading the line, and so those runs from deeper aren't possible. They're harder to track, obviously, for a team like, for any team really. They're harder to track, and I think that's what added the sort of invention and more creative freedom that we saw. And moving forward in the 75th minute, we saw a great save from Kelleher, who is Chelsea's bogeyman at keeper, moving backwards to when he was at Liverpool, those cup finals, you know. It was a clip ball or a ball played over the top. I can't remember from who. It might have been Enzo, I believe, on the right-hand side. And Pedro Neto, who I thought had a solid game, does a really good job of beating his man. I think it was Pinnock to the ball. And then cutting inside. And João Pedro might have had a shout to have the ball laid off to him, but it was a good shot from Pedro Neto, and Ethan Pinnock did a great job of blocking it. Actually, that is a completely different chance. In any case, Cole Palmer also had something like that off a Pedro Neto chance where he lays the ball back, and João Pedro kind of dummies it, and Cole Palmer comes onto it. It was a good save by Kelleher, but Cole Palmer should have done better with the finish. It really should have been 2-1 at that moment. And then hopefully from there it was cruising, but it wasn't the case. He had a couple chances where he snatched that as well, where he probably could have done better. I'll excuse it, obviously. first match back off an injury where he didn't even start this match, wasn't fully fit to start it. But in any case, I thought the chances were there in order to secure the 3 points, if I had to say. We saw soon after that Garnacho make his debut for the club, coming on for João Pedro, and which moved Tyreek George back to striker. And immediately we saw, I think it was his first touch even, he played a decent ball into a danger area. I'm not sure if he was trying to pick anybody out. I don't think he was. I think he was just playing the ball into the middle and hoping something comes of it, which it did. Because in the 83rd, 84th minute, whatever it was, he played that ball. It falls back to Caicedo, and it was an incredible finish, I have to say. He's a kind of a bangers only type of guy when it comes to scoring goals. I think pretty much every goal he scored for the club has been an incredible shot, except for the one a few weeks ago against West Ham, where he kind of flapped at a ball from a corner and scored. But I thought he was a little leggy and looked a little bit tired, but you can't complain about that finish. And from there, I thought, the 3 points were secured. To be honest with you, I thought the team were going to get away with 3 points there. Unfortunately, as I said, where Brentford were going to try and have their advantage was in transition, where they scored their first goal, and then set pieces, which is where they got their second goal. Technically, I think a long throw-in is a set piece, but in any case, it was a long throw that was ultimately bounced through and got to the back post. I think it was knocked on by Collins, if I had to say. I don't remember exactly, but he knocked it on, and Garnacho loses Carvalho on the back post, and Carvalho puts it away. I think it's deserved from Brentford, if I had to say. I don't think Chelsea, on the performance, deserved the 3 points, although I thought it was going to be secured, and it wasn't to be. And unfortunately, that's how the match ended. The overall performance, I would have to say that it was a bit of a struggle. Coming into the match, I was like, hey, this needs to be a match that begins like a defining point for the season. These next 6 matches, for the first 4 being away, heading into the international break, the next October international break, I should say. And I thought it would be a key point in the season for where Chelsea would ultimately end up. Would they be among the title hopefuls? I don't want to say challengers. Or would they be a team that was looking to secure Champions League again? And looking at the bigger picture, obviously it is just one match. You never know. Liverpool could drop points tomorrow. Although Arsenal, I think, had a 3-0 win earlier today. But yeah, I'm hoping the turnaround against Bayern Munich in the Champions League in midweek. I hope that the performance isn't what we saw today, because if the team plays like what we saw today, they're going to get smoked away to Bayern, unfortunately. But I think that also comes with the fact that hopefully Cole Palmer's fully fit and starts in that match. Hopefully Estevao is over his illness and can at the very least make the bench, if not start. And then I would imagine Cucurella and Reece James or Gusto start at fullback. I do want to make a note that it's back to that, starting 11 complaint that I had at right back, Fofana. I'm not sure why Gusto didn't start. He didn't come off the bench, obviously, because Reece James was available. And in the end, with the tactical change that the manager made by inverting a right back into midfield, Reece James was always going to be the better option for that. I think if Gusto would have played, he would have been either the right center back, stayed at a right center back, or provided the width, because I think the manager realizes that obviously inverting into midfield is not Gusto's strength. While he can do a job if necessary, it's not what he wants to be doing. And with Pedro and Neto playing on the right, it just wasn't, Reece James just ends up being the better option. But I'm surprised that Gusto did not start in this match and didn't see the pitch at all. Maybe he's carrying a knock. I am not sure. Who knows? We'll see. But if he was 100% fit, he would have been my choice to start at right back. Fofana looked, in his first start for who knows how long, he looked okay, I guess. You know, those transitions, those both Shada chances, the one blocked by Tosin in the first half and the goal came with a ball over the top of Tosin and Shada peeling off the shoulder of Tosin and in behind Wesley Fofana. And I don't remember for the first goal if he was even in position to recover, but that second goal he looked a little slow, I had to say, getting back into cover, and that's part of the reason Shada was able to score the goal. I thought it was a great game plan by Brentford. Obviously, they're built around winning in the margins, as I said previously. So, you know, well played to them. Deserved 1 point for both teams, if I had to say. Bayern midweek coming up. This type of performance obviously is not going to get the job done. Hopefully, it's a turnaround from what we saw today in terms of the performance and as well as the players. I imagine, if I had to guess an early prediction, I would imagine Garnacho gets the start on the left, especially if Esteval isn't fully back, you know, healthy. But I'll save that for the match preview. In any case, I appreciate you for watching if you've come across this video. And we will see y'all in a video in the future. Thanks. Peace.